Hi there, Paul here from Volaticus, an aerial production company with an interest in simulation and aviation. Today we're going to do the final leg of our high altitude ski resorts flights. We last time arrived in Aspen and we arrived in the Challenger 300. We are going to do the final leg this time in an aircraft that is new to me, which is the Epic E1000, so slight departure from twin engine jet flying. This is a turbine, single engine turbine aircraft with a very decent performance, capable of in excess of 300 knots at flight level 300, and this is a perfect aircraft for this kind of flight. So let's get in and have a look around. Okay, so this is a very modern cockpit with this particular edition is the G1000 edition, which uses the Garmin style instrumentation. There is also a Skyview alternative, but I went for this one because I'm more familiar with it. I'm using ForeFlight today as well, which is an aviator's application which one runs on iOS. So if you are not someone with iOS devices, then I'm afraid you're out of luck. It's also not really dedicated to simulator flyers. It's something that's aimed at aviators who have access to an aircraft, but they have a kind of ground simulation feature on it which allows you to experiment with that without actually being in an aircraft, and that's useful for simulator flyers. So at the moment we're looking at ForeFlights in the map views, the VFR map view, and we're based at Aspen, Kilo Alpha Sierra Echo, and this shows some of the terrain in the area. So as you probably realise, it's quite mountainous, and Aspen has it's one of those places with a specific approach. It's not a regular kind of approach. It's quite a steep approach. I think it's 6 degrees rather than 3, and it's also an offset approach, which means that you're not in perfect alignment with the runway. At some point you're going to need to turn to line up with that. It's also a place that, certainly for airliners, is not one that you can take off and land in both directions. Now that's interesting to say, because we're going to have a look at the weather and see if that favours our departure routing. Before we do that, let's just have a look at setting up our navigation in ForeFlight. So we start by creating a route. If I click on the FPL, the flight plan, shows there's absolutely nothing in there, and we could actually just type in our routing, or we can just click on the screen to select a waypoint or an airport or an intersection and click add to route. So that's Aspen in there. We're going to go to Las Vegas North, which is KVGT, so I'm going to just type that in. So that's the other way of doing it, and that will actually create a straight line between our airports, 435 nautical miles, and just zoom out to have a look at both of those. Obviously this is a VFR map, not going to be using VFR, the visual flight rules today. It will be an IFR flight, but I thought it was interesting to see the terrain around Aspen. We can do the same with Las Vegas. So some mountains in the area. Obviously it's much more flat than Aspen area. I'm going to have to check the weather as well. But, Las Vegas tends to be pretty favourable. It's unusual to get IFR conditions there, but we will obviously plan ahead and see what approach we'll get into Las Vegas if we need it. Okay, so that's a direct line. How would we actually plan this route? Well, in ForeFlight we have a routes tab that comes up, which actually is a list of routes that have been filed by real aviators, and just have a look through there, the options there. And it also has a pictographical representation of those, so we can actually see some of those routes. Most of them are about 450 miles, but you see there's one here which is a bit of a dog leg, so we're not going to take that one, I can safely say, but most of them are about 450 miles. The other thing to look at here is the height limitation, because some of these airways are low altitude airways, and we're going to be wanting to get up to at least sort of flight level 240 today. So let's have a look through. So all of these are quite low, and what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go for the airway. So this will join on the Victor 134, Victor 8, Victor 235 and Victor 394 airway. So let's select that one. And what that does now is that puts that route into our flight plan, and also it will show us, if we zoom out, it still looks like a straight line, but you can see lots of waypoints in there, and that's the route I'm going to transfer into the aircraft. So 446 miles, this aircraft is able to cruise in excess of 300 knots. So we are looking at about an hour and a half in the air, maybe slightly longer. I'm going to probably accelerate some of that so you don't have to sit through the whole flight. Next consideration will be the weather. So let's have a look at the weather for both the destination and departure point. And for this, we could use for flight. In fact, let's have a look at that. We'll click on one of the airports, open that up, click on weather, and in the green it gives you the weather. Well, I say it's green because it's VFR. That's what we're experiencing here at Aspen. So the wind is from the south, it's 16 knots, gusting 24. That means actually that for a lot of the aircraft that we wouldn't be able to depart with such a strong tailwind if we were to go north, which is how we normally would depart Aspen. In this little aircraft we can actually depart south, and we've got the ability to make a much tighter turn than if we were in an airliner, so that's exactly what we're going to do. 10 miles or better, visibility broken 7,000, and the altimeter is 2999. So I'm just going to use the opportunity now just to stick that in here, and obviously you can see from the altitude strip that's quite a high airport at Aspen, so we have to factor that in. I'm just going to scale these windows down. They always appear a little big. Let's do the same with this one as well. This is the avionics one. Scale those down, but they never quite remember the position, so once we set them, it's should be easy to they'll stay put unless I move them. So what I have is on the joystick I have a couple of buttons which bring those into view, and that's really useful. I'm looking out the side and they just kind of block the view, which is annoying, so a couple of presses on the button get rid of them. I'm going to go back to the front and just bring them back in view. Just slightly easier to read than the instrumentation on the aircraft. So let's have a look at the weather at Las Vegas, and what we can do is use another app for this. ForeFlight, as I say, has that built in, but there is another app we can use. The one I prefer is called Weather Station, or Station Weather, which is this one here, and that is giving us similar sort of detail here, so it's a bit more visual. Let's have a look. Click on Las Vegas. As of 25 minutes ago, so the wind is northerly 13 knots. Visibility is clear. That's typical sort of Vegas weather, quite warm, 29 degrees. And then it's reporting Aspen from 25 minutes ago, 170, 16, gusting 24. So this should correspond with the weather that we've just picked up. It's 12 degrees, so it's quite a bit cooler, but broken clouds 7,000. So that's just something. Obviously, we can probably encounter cloud somewhere on our departure. Okay, so the next thing, we need to get some fuel on board. So as I say, it's a 1.5 hour trip. So with the Epic E1000, most of the configuration is done through this little menu here. So I'll just give you a quick tour of that. So we've got the fuel setting here, so that you can see that we have some fuel but not a sufficient amount. I would normally go for a flight of this length probably 200 kilos a side, so let's do that. I love the way it lists when you actually increase the fuel. So this has got a decent range actually. I mean 200 is only about half full, and if you were doing a longer trip, I mean that would that'll be more than sufficient for the trip today. And then you've also got the weight section, so you can simulate the weight of passengers, and it actually, from the external view, you can actually see people in the cockpit. If we put the we've got the co-pilot in there, actually can't see them for some reason. Just as I said you could. They do show up. Yeah, so you can see the child in the back. You can see. I don't know why the co-pilot's not appearing there. Yeah, that's odd. Okay, but it doesn't really make any difference. You can't see them from the inside. If you look behind, there's absolutely no one in the back seats there. These are just for the weights really, so we can determine how much we're loading the aircraft up. 60 kilos of bags and some passengers makes it a bit more interesting. The other options here, ground power unit, which is connected at the moment. And this is this device here, as you can see, and that's providing electric power for us, and it's something that's useful to have for starting the engines. And then the other thing is the static elements, and the static elements refer to the tow bar and the flags on the aircraft, and also the locking mechanism that holds the propellers still. So it's just a visual thing as much as anything, although we can get rid of the static elements now. And as soon as we do, the propeller starts slowly spinning because it's free to do so. So we've loaded up fuel. Let us go ahead and set the flight plan. And then what I'm going to do actually is going to close the door, because it's getting rather loud. It's better. And we can put the so the batteries weren't on because we were actually on the external power, but put the avionics on, and this is where that larger window comes in useful. So let's have a look at the flight plan. Now I'm using a device called the Elgato Stream Deck, which is like a programmable keyboard, except for the keys are mini LCD screens, which is really useful. At some point I will create graphics for those rather than text, but at the moment it's like a keyboard where you've written over your labels, and it's useful because you can actually set different pages of labels depending on the stage of flight, and it's quite handy for the setup as well of the flight plan, which is what I'm going to be doing now. So let's just go through the menu. We'll delete the flight plan because there was one in there already. KASE is our starting point, that's Aspen. So KVGT is North Vegas. Oops, there's North Las Vegas. So this is some good GA airport if you're flying into Vegas. The other one is Henderson, which is south of the city. But this is slightly better equipped, a slightly more exciting place to go into. And then I'm going to access the flight plan from ForeFlight, and that gives us the details of the airways and the intersections en route. So Lindsay is the first one there. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter all these details. And for each one, I'm just checking the distance is reasonable. So anything under a sort of 50 miles is sounds about right. If it came up with 2,000 miles, we'd probably have the misspelling of the waypoint. So this next one is, or the next point is Victor 134. That's actually an airway. So I don't know what's going on here. Hang on. There we are. Load airway and 134, and that's to Juliet November Charlie. There it is. You have to sometimes search up and down the lists to find them, and we'll load that in. And then we switch to the Victor 8 airway, but you have to mess around with the cursor on the flight plan. It's quite a complex route actually for not a hugely long flight. So this is the Victor 8. It's certainly a lot easier than typing in manually. Victor 8 to Philly. There it is. Load that. Then the next one is an airway Victor 235, but we have to scroll down to the bottom of the one we just put in. Imagine putting these points in manually. What a nightmare that would be. Menu 235, and that goes to Triple M, and that's pre-selected. That's handy. That's just 1 point. And then menu, load airway, and the final one is Victor 394, and that is to Suvi, which is just there. And that is us done for the moment. Now the other thing on an IFR flight, would probably want to set a departure point, routing using a sort of IFR standard instrument departure. All of those really point to the north, so I'm not going to bother with that, because we have VFR conditions here, and we can sort of establish IFR as soon as we've taken off and we've done our left turn, and we've got some altitude to our first point, which is Lindsay. Let's just have a look at that where we are, and just zoom in, and you can see the first point, Lindsay, there. It's clearly marked on there. So as soon as we've departed, done a left turn, got some altitude, we can fly direct to Lindsay. Okay, we're done on the routing, so that's the flight plan all set up. Next thing would be to consider our first altitude, and that would normally come with our IFR clearance. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to assume that we've been cleared to 12,000. So we'll set that up on the altitude bug, and I've only set up a button to do whole 1,000 feet units, so I have to do that manually if I want anything in between. So there's 12,000 set. We've got 2999, which is our altimeter setting at Aspen. I'm using a checklist which I created from the flight manual, and this gives us it's just basically a slightly nicer looking format. It's copied from the actual manual itself. So I've done everything on the first page there. We can start running through this as well. So fuel selector, fullest tank, so they're fairly well balanced. So what we'll do is we'll go on the left to start with. It doesn't really make any difference here. And then 3 levers, so we've got power, propeller and condition lever. In fact 4, because the landing gear is also a lever. Make sure they're all in the down position. So I'm flying with a Cytec tri-lever throttle unit here, which is really useful, particularly for these complex aircraft. Switches off, well, we'll keep them on for the moment. This refers to the other switches actually, but battery and avionics should be on. ELT, arms, Okay, it's armed and tested. Flaps up and beacon on. So some of these you'll see me clicking around the cockpit, but actually I also have access to a Stream Deck panel, which has actually got keyboard shortcuts that I've set up for all of these. It really helps the experience. So we're actually in the before start process at the moment, so I'll be using that for the rest of the procedure. So battery voltage, just make sure that we've got good voltage, and it's 28 volts, which is largely thanks to the external power supply, and that needs to be at least 23 for starting. Next thing is to put the strobe lights on. So I'm just going to turn that off so you can see the switches coming on here. Fuel pump, well, we're on the left tank, so we'll put the fuel pump onto the left tank. And so the other thing we'll notice with this is the fuel pressure rises. If we switch into the different the alternative mode there, you see pressure's 23. If I now switch to the right tank, you see that drops, and then switch back to the left tank. It just confirms that our fuel pumps are working correctly. Normally it would drop to 0. I don't know why it didn't go to 0 on that occasion. Maybe it's because we're at a certain altitude, I don't know, but you should see a change. So say we drop to the right tank and then back to the left, it should restore to 23 or so. Fuel quantity as well is good. We've got in terms of pounds, just under 1,000 pounds available, and it will also keep tally of the amount we've used. And that's quite useful because in terms of planning, we don't really have access to the information you get for airliners, so it's useful to know roughly how much fuel you need to load for each flight. Okay, so we've done that check now, so we're just about to start up. Just make sure, I think the door is closed. We'll keep the ground power unit connected while we go through the startup sequence, and I have an engine start page for that on the Stream Deck. The first stage will be to engage the starter, and let me just close these. You can see some of the switches coming on, and switch back to the standard view there. So these top 4 gauges are the ones we're really going to look at with oil pressure and oil temperature. So it's these 6 really that we're going to look at. So start by switching on the starter, and you hear that firing up, and when that gets to 8 we can switch the igniter on, and then when it's up to 15 we can actually put the aircraft to low idle, and you can see the ITT rising. It goes above peak, but then it starts coming down. So we're just going to keep an eye on these gauges as the engine spools into life. And as soon as we're happy with that, we can actually switch the igniter off, and at this point we can dispense with ground power. And we're done with the aircraft configuration screen for now. Start generator comes on automatically. It's this one here, so that's the generator running from the engines. Check the voltage is above 27 volts. It should be 27 to 28.5. It's at 28 exactly, so I'm happy with that. And oil pressure, temperatures, everything's in green, which is great. So after engine starts, there's 5 switches that we need to go through. I'm going to just bring the view down slightly because some of them are actually on this bottom here. So standby altimeter, that's that little device here, so that shows airspeed and altitude. It's our standby. The trim master. So trim and autopilot won't work with that without the trim and the autopilot master switches on, so they've been put on. Stick pusher is the anti-stall device, and then air pressure is our pressurization system. So that's 5 that need to come on. Next one is taxi lights, which we will switch on now. We're about to taxi. Avionics, we have set everything up, so that's ready to go. Just want to bring up the flight plan and just make sure that I put the cursor back to our starting point. It's quite a long way up here actually, because it's a huge list of waypoints. But the first one, yeah, KASE, so that will quickly go to Linz as we start moving, because we're already at Aspen, which is KASE. Linz is our first waypoint. So I want to make sure that's set and we don't have an intermediate one set. Let's see, so avionics, we've got the altimeter set as well. Open that up, 7850 approximately, which sounds about right. Flight plan's done. Voltage is all good, happy with that. So the next bit is to taxi, so propeller fully forward, and then just release the brakes, and I'm going to just get rid of these screens for the moment. So the first thing is the brake check. Oh, that's good. And we're going to be taking off from our present position. We're going to be taking off right to left, so we need to taxi to the right, so that we're aiming for the southerly runway 17. I'm going to continue with the checks now. So we've checked the brakes. Flaps are going to be set for takeoff, which is one stage. Actually quite sluggish here. I think it's probably the altitude. Normally I set, you're meant to set low idle, but sometimes you need to actually bring that up a little bit. So the next part of the check is to check the beta, which is like the reverse thrusters. So that I'll set high idle, and you hear the RPM go up slightly. There it is. And then back to idle and set low idle. The other thing is trim. Well, it's already preset at a pretty good level. If we're particularly heavy, we might want to set that slightly higher, but we can mess around with that in flight. The other thing is the autopilot modes. It defaults to roll and pitch hold, but the pitch hold isn't very good. It's never high enough, so I normally set vertical speed mode on takeoff, and I'm going to do that now. Vertical speed, and we'll just come up a little bit. Should get about 2,000. This aircraft can effortlessly deal with 2,000 feet a minute. Let's see, we've got really strong wind. I'm not sure how it's going to handle this. It looks like quite a crosswind, even though it said it's 170. We can see it's more than that. And gusting as well. Now this aircraft does actually take off fairly sharpish. It's not a slouch when it comes to departure. So just to clarify, runway 15 will be our departure runway, not 17. That was the wind vector. So the main checks will be the power checks just before takeoff. So we'll do those at the whole short line here, but there is a bit of a backtrack, which I think we're going to do because it's the safest thing to do. We could easily make it from here, but it's high, it's 8,000 feet, so it's going to take quite a bit of runway space. Okay, high idle. And we'll bring the power up to 1500 RPM. And then just excise the propeller. Typical sort of twin engine or complex engine thing you do. And check idle. Transponder we haven't dealt with yet. I'm going to just warm that up and assume that we get the transponder code in flight. Sometimes you get that with your clearance, sometimes in flight. So we'll switch that onto altitude as we're about to go. The autopilot master switch is on. Flight instruments check, and they're good. Flaps takeoff 10 degrees. Trims set for takeoff. Igniter, so we can switch the igniter on now. Pitot heat can come on as well, so that's just down here. And external lights is required. Well, we'll put the landing light on now, and we're ready. So a quick check out. Can't really see out of that window. Assume we have clearance, so let's go ahead. Okay, ready. It's gusting today. I'm going to put it in heading mode as well. That gives us control over that. Propellers come back a little bit just after takeoff, and it's flat retraction speed. I was going to fly it in this direction a little bit, and then we'll just do a turn when we're a little bit clear of this other mountain. There's a bit of terrain to the right. You can see why airlines can't do this. And we don't want to get too near to this one either. So I'm just going to bring a climb rate up a little bit, so give us a bit more spacing from mountains. We're 1,000 to go on the height. Let's come up a little bit more. Let's come up to 16,000. Flight level change this time. Keep coming back a little bit on the propeller. and there's the airport on the left. So it's fine with the performance of this aircraft, but you wouldn't want to be doing this with a heavy laden airliner, particularly if you had an engine failure on takeoff. That would be that wouldn't end well, would it? Switch it into nav mode now, and that will then fly an intercept to pick up on our plan track from Aspen to Lindsay, which is the first waypoint. So we are above 10,000, but I kept the lights on really until we're sort of just at the peak of the mountains, which we're reaching now, and we'll switch the landing light off now. The igniter also can come off. Zoom out a little bit on the map. And what we'll do is we'll come up to flight level 240 and flight level change again. You notice this aircraft really climbs very well. So we're about to enter some cloud, so we can switch on some of the anti-ice equipment here. As you can see, the outside air temperature is minus 11 at this point, so that's going to create some icing for us if we're not careful. So just flying through one layer, you can see another layer of cloud above.
Climbing through transition altitude.
It's passing the transition altitude, so I can switch to 2992. And we'll imagine that we've been given a squawk at this point as well from one of the controls en route. So let's put some numbers in there, 3, 5, 6, 7, for example. I've actually set up the numbers on the Stream Deck, which saves a huge amount of time typing it in. We've got quite a headwind here, although most of the flight's going to be westerly, so it's going to probably transition into a crosswind, which doesn't really help. And you see icing detecting on the warning panel there. So we have the anti-icing equipment all on. The other thing you can do at this point is switch on the defrost, put the air conditioner on as well, and put passenger oxygen on, something I've forgot to do. Okay, so now we're clear of cloud for the moment. We can switch off the anti-icing equipment, keep the pitot heat on, but everything else can come off. And our icing warning has gone off as well, which is good. It's approaching Lindsay at this time. So I went for the G1000 edition of this aircraft. As I say, there's a Skyview edition as well. I'm just used to the G1000, albeit not a great model and not completely accurate, but just used to it. And I found the Skyview one looked a little bit like a video game, so I just preferred the look of this one. And on full flight we can actually switch to the IFR high level chart as well. So that gives us a nice complement to the moving map on the G1000. So as I say, full flight really is not aimed at simulator pilots at all, but can be used in the simulator environment, because their simulation of our position, or at least it can receive the position for X-plane, and it can show us that on the map, so it's great as a training aid. So just approaching flight level 240, and we'll hold there for a moment and get the speed built up a bit. We've got a bit of a little bit of a headwind at 67 knots across the aircraft, so not going to be able to quite maintain the sort of normal cruise speed that we would hope. And you can even see the angle the aircraft is listing on the track. You can see how it's battling quite a crosswind there. And I keep bringing the propeller back as well. You see the propellers are a bit like gears on a car. As you're going faster, you need to obviously adjust that. So I've climbed up to flight level 280. Probably wasn't a very good idea, because we're actually getting 82 knots crosswind here, and it's really hammering our ground speed today, which is unfortunate, because I wanted to demonstrate just quite how decent this is actually for a single engine gas turbine aircraft. But still, 266 ground. Imagine if that was a little Cessna or something, you'd actually probably be going backwards at this point, so you can't really complain. Let's have a quick look while we can. We've just really started the flight, so we're only sort of the first 20% of the flight, quite a long way to go, but it's always worth keeping an eye out rather for the weather. So have a look at station weather now at North Las Vegas. So that's a recent report, 3 minutes ago. winds 320, 14, actually shows the wind on the runway, which is really handy. So we'll land northwesterly. That's also 14 gusting 22. Very similar wind speed to our departure point. Temperature's gone up a little bit. Visibility is 10 or more. Nothing below 12,000, so that's great. So it's going to be a visual approach. Probably set that up for the RNAV approach into runway 30, I think it is. So let's have a look at that in ForeFlight. So with the subscription for ForeFlight, you can choose North America, which includes the 48 contiguous states. I'm not sure it includes Alaska. I guess it probably does. It doesn't include Canada though. That's a separate subscription. And it doesn't include Europe either. So if you're flying in those regions, then you'll have to pay extra, and it's the same cost again. You're basically paying per region. The price of it is $100 US, about £80 sterling, plus tax, and that's per region. So if you're flying in Canada and the US, then it's going to be $200, about £160. I've been using another application called Navigraph Charts, which has its advantages. In probably the main one for a simulator flyer is that it covers the whole Earth of the Earth and gives you Jefferson charts for everywhere on Earth, and that's just one subscription. But that's not really so handy if you're a real pilot, because it's not something you can take into the cockpit with you. So let's continue just looking at the ForeFlight. So I've got KVGT selected, show on the map, and put that into full screen. It'll actually bring it open to airport's view, and we can have a look at the arrival and approaches. Well, I'm more bothered about the approach. We've got GPS runway 12, we've got GPS runway 30. It's probably going to be 30 that I'm interested in there because of the wind speed. We can actually click this button to actually overlay it on the map, which is really handy. Now I'm using a trial of ForeFlight, and I think this feature, this charts on map feature, is actually part of the mid-tier subscription, which is $200 rather than $100. I'm not completely sure, because I thought it was just a trial of the basic one, but for that you get charts on the map and you actually see yourself animated on the map, but you also get this synthetic vision, which shows you mountains and terrain. Well, that's not working, so that's what makes me think maybe they now include that as part of the basic package, because you wouldn't get synthetic vision as part of that, and it doesn't seem to be working. This is really handy though, as you can see. It shows you our visual plan, with Suvi being the last waypoint and then KVGT being our destination, and we can actually decide how we're going to fly this approach. So for example, we could go to Kenuk, which is our initial fix, and we would need to be above 5100 for that. So we could decide, okay, from Suvi maybe we should be flight level 120 and then to Kenuk at 5100, and then fly the approach from there. But as I say, it's very visual today, so I'm not really worried too much about that, having to fly the RNAV, but it's useful to have it. Just one thing to point out, and it's not so clear from this, but it's an offset RNAV, so there's maybe 10-12 degrees difference between our track, which is 285, and the landing runway, which is nominally 30. So that's something when you're looking out, you're thinking, where's the runway? And it's because it's offset slightly, so just something to be aware of. So with ForeFlight we also have all kinds of layers of information. I think this is where it is superior to Navigraph. They're quite different products to the extent you could probably own both, but it's quite difficult to justify both. They're about $100 each per year. You'd have to be fairly serious about your simulation to justify that, but if you're like me, probably spending that on aircraft and scenery as well. It's just, you know, obviously all adds up. So on ForeFlight, this is we're using this on an iPad today. So this has got some different layers we can look at. We can actually switch to the VFR section, which is the view we had when we started. You can also have an aerial map, which is kind of like a satellite view, although actually that's going to screw things up a little bit. You can even have the street map, which is a sort of simplified map of ground level, like a road map. You also have weather radar, which is really handy. There's not really much to affect us today, but you can put that on and see flying above a layer of cloud. That's the layer that we came through on the way out. But there's all kinds of different options there, with different satellite visualizations, that kind of thing. Icing, turbulence, that kind of thing is very handy. So bear in mind this is aimed at real aviators, particularly people who are sort of owner-operators flying their own aircraft. And that's why there's that level of detail. But you can see why it's useful and handy to give people this simulation while they're on the ground, when they're practicing on their home simulator. The other thing that's worthy of mention is, just have the settings actually here. So in terms of the map, at the moment we've got a north-up view, which means that we're able to see the aircraft on as it would appear on a chart, but we can also have a track-up view, which will orientate obviously the direction, so that the aircraft's always flying up the map. I find this more confusing though. I prefer to put it in north-up. And there's the other option, which is track up forward, so it just sets the aircraft in the bottom, the lower third. But let's switch back to north up for the moment. That's the settings, and then this is quite handy. It's a data strip, for want of a better word, which allows you to configure what you see on there. So this has been set up not very well, to say, but gives you all kinds of data on there. But for example, we've got vertical speed, feet per minute. If you click on that, we can then change that to something else, like the ETA for the next waypoint. So click on that, and now it's updated. So you can set this up for however you wish. Very useful as a bit of extra data that you can use in flying. And then at the bottom of the screen here, you've got different tabs. We're in the map view, which is showing us our route. When I clicked on airports and I set them to full screen, it shows them in this view, and this gives you the information about the airport, weather, runways. Also shows you, like for north of Las Vegas, showing you that it's favouring runway 30. It says for the best wind, giving you the crosswind factor is only 1 to 2 knots, but it's mostly down the runway, so it's a quick reckoner to indicate your best runway to use. Our procedures, which is our approaches and arrivals, also our departures, and a NOTAM. So this is all live. As I say, this is aimed at real pilots, so this will be current and up to date. And then maps, obviously what we were looking at, and then charts. This is where we can add in charts. And what you can do is, on the ground you can create a flight and you can add in any approach plates that you might need, because obviously you're not necessarily going to get any internet access on the flight, so you can store a package of all the approach plates that you might need for your destination, your departure and your alternate. And there's tons of other stuff in here, documents that you can access, imagery. I haven't really explored some of these, but things like weather charts that are kept up to date, a list of the flights that you've done. You've got a scratch pad, which is useful in the cockpit for making a note if you don't use any physical paper and pen. But checklist is one of the more useful features. You can actually set up checklists so that they appear on ForeFlight, and as you go through, click on each item and it will tick, say it's been completed. That's really useful. And then a logbook as well, and I think the logbook is part of the basic subscription, and it looks like it will automatically keep a record of the flights that you do, and that's just a selection. There's also more other things that you can put in here, so it takes a while to really get used to ForeFlight, but that's not to say it's unintuitive. It's very, very easy to set it up the way you want it, but you just need to put a bit of time in. So we're just we're much nearer now. Just approaching Philly. I've set up the altitude for Suvi to be 12,000 feet. So that's now calculated a descent profile, and says we've got a minute and a half before we need to start descending. That's based on a 2.5 degree descent. What I normally do is just change that to 3 degrees, which is a bit more comfortable. That means it will gives us a little bit more time, keeps us higher for longer, which is always good with sort of turbine engines. The other thing is the ATIS. So we're getting it digitally in ForeFlight for KVGT. Just check that. I don't think that will have been updated significantly since the last time we checked. It's still 320 at 14 gusting 22. Altimeter though 2994 is what we're looking for. So it's only 2 millibars away from our current setting. I'm sorry, it's imperial, isn't it? So it's 0.02 inches of mercury. So we're not going to. So our height is not going to change dramatically when we change to local barometer settings. What I do need to do is just set up our initial descent. So we'll say 12,000, which is Suvi, and then put it into VNAV mode as well. And that should automatically pick up on that descent profile as we approach. Should be in about 2 minutes' time. You see it's counting down to the time to Todd, which is top of descent. And it's also giving us our target descent rate, which is 1,700 or so feet per minute, which is quite comfortable in this aircraft. And there's a little blob as well. I don't know if you can see that on the chart. It's a little circle, and that shows us our top of descent point, which is really quite useful as a way of visualising that. And one thing about the G1000. It doesn't always pick up on the descent profile for some reason. I put it down to a bug now. But you see the little magenta thing next to the altitude strip, that sort of arrow right at the top, you can only see half of that. They'll actually start coming down to get near our descent point. If that doesn't automatically engage a descent, I normally would use the vertical speed, and we know what the target is, about 1700, so we can just set that up. That's also represented on the right of the altitude strip by the other arrow. You see it's about 1700. Does seem to have worked, so I'm going to bring back the power slightly because we don't want to be going too fast, but we're well below 250, so we should be able to go below 10,000 and maintain our current indicated airspeed. We now have more of a crosswind than a headwind component, so ground speed is actually decent, 338 at this point. The other thing is, you can see on the chart here on the 4 flights, SUVI goes direct to KVGT. We want to actually put in the approach. We're going to put the approach in as the GPS runway 30, so let's do that now. And Kenuk is the initial approach fix. Load that in, and then just a little workaround here. So we've got SUVI as our last point before we go direct to KVGT, but we can actually put in a copy of Kenuk so that we start descending to that point. We can actually put an altitude in there. It's automatically set, but without activating the approach, it'd be nice if it could actually start descending, so it's at the right altitude when we actually commence the approach, and we've got a bit more time to switch over. So let's put that in now. And then we can actually set the altitude on there as well. So that's 5100, I think. And that would then, well, in theory it would adjust our descent profile, but it won't, because actually we have 12,000 at SUVI, which I set up as a temporary one. We could actually clear that now. And actually it's suggesting that we want to not be at 12,000 but 10,200, so that's why the descent profile's changed. You saw the nose go down slightly, because now it needs to be 2,000 or so lower than it thought. Let's go through the process of picking up the ATIS as well, even though we have it. It's 11805 for North Las Vegas.
North Las Vegas information, Bravo 2200 Zulu weather. Wind 320 at 8. Visibility more than 10. Sky clear. Temperature 29. Dew point 2. area QNH1014, arriving runway 30 right, departing runway 30 left, advise on initial contact to have Bravo.
Information Bravo. 2994 is the altimeter. It's giving me that in millibars, which is not much use for this aircraft. It's set up to be inches of mercury. So just to clarify, the reason for putting Canuck in here is that it stops it going direct from Suvi to KVGT, allowing us a little bit of time to switch over. So I haven't actually put in the approach into 4 flights. I guess we could do that though. It's the GPS runway 30. Yeah, but actually I don't think it adds it to the flight plan. Which is fair enough, it will actually show us flying it, but won't actually add it to the flight plan. It could put Canuck in there if you wanted to, but not really any need. Let's have a look at the checklist items. Okay, so on the descent, power is required, we're below 270. Peter heat is on still. ATIS we check, approach briefing, it's GPS 30, nav aids not required, or at least we set it all up. Just as we get below 10,000 we put the landing lights on, make sure the speed's still below 250, and then as we're cleared to altitudes below that, make sure we're on local QNH. Obviously as we descend we need to keep advancing the propellers forward so they're more and more fine, the exact opposite of the climb. Here that's why you heard a slight raise in the RPM as I was making an adjustment there. And we can bring this down to 5,000 as well, as we've been cleared, essentially cleared onto the approach. I don't want it to stop at 12. That was just an initial stopgap to set the sort of sector safety altitude, but we're quite close now, so we can actually set that lower. So this animation on the chart is really handy as an educational aid, but also for orientation. You can see that point on the IFR chart, you can see all of the points on the approach. You could actually almost simulate a radar approach using this. So when we reach Suvi and it will turn to Canuck, we can then activate the approach, and that should then take us to Canuck, and then it will fly the approach from there. As I say, this is an offset approach, so we're about 15 degrees off the runway centre line. But this is for 30 left. There's actually parallel runways at Las Vegas. Now, as we're approaching 10,000, let's stick in the landing lights. You see the Hoover Dam, I think, is over there. I think that's what it is. As I say, the best dam attraction in Vegas. So just past Suvi now, just turning to Kennock. And this point we've got a bit of time now because we're wanting to route to Kennock and then join the approach from there. So let's go ahead and activate the approach now. So just select the approach, menu, activate leg. The other thing I'll do is set the approach mode as well. That'll give us our glide path vertical navigation as well. That should help us to continue our descent in accordance with the procedure. I'll set 3,000 on here as well. Should descend anyway because it should latch onto the approach. And just see the skyline now, just as we're approaching. You see the can't remember what they call it now. I've actually stayed there. The tall hotel goes up to about 2,000 feet. Stratosphere, I think it is. It's got funfair rides at the top. It's got a roller coaster and all kinds of stuff. So I'm not really that bothered about heights, but I wouldn't go on some of that. It's really white knuckle stuff. Lovely day here as usual. This is typical Vegas weather. Right, I'm just going to bring the speed back a little bit. Let's come back to about 210 or so. So we're only a couple of miles away from Kennock. And put the igniter on as well. So it should just continue descending in accordance with the procedure, but we'll just keep an eye on that because it doesn't always do what it's meant to do. As soon as we get into the descent, put the gear down, which get the speed lower still. There it is. Gear down. Come back to about 160. Still a way away, so we don't want to be too low. This is the nice thing about this aircraft. It's you know, you can keep up with the airliners. So we're on right tank as well. I just want to confirm that. So we'll switch to left. So slightly more fuel in the left tank. Just check also, we can check the altitudes. That's 3900 at Jacob, which we just passed, so that corresponds to that altimeter altitude setting, so we can see that is accurate. And the next one will be 3200 at 30 THR. That's just good practice to keep an eye on it. Now, as we look out, as I say, you're looking for kind of lines directly in your line of vision, which are the runways, but you won't actually see it here. It's slightly offset, which makes it a little bit disconcerting. Can see it there actually, just there, see the two runways. Okay, so that's bringing a stage of flap and bring the speed back a little bit. That seriously reduces speed when you bring in the flap. Second stage flap coming in. So it goes from airliner to GA aircraft, and that's partly the attraction of it. So I'm going to fly this manually. So we're kind of, it's meant to be approached onto 30 left, autopilot coming off. I'm just going to follow this road a little bit, put us on a short base. So approach speed about 80 knots or so.
500. 400. 300.
'So you have to factor in our altitude here as well. We're not sea level.
200.
Wind check more or less down the runway.
100.
Good to land.
50. 40. 30. 20. 10.
Welcome to North Las Vegas. I'll just cross over here to the apron and then can do the after landing checks. Bring the flaps up first of all, we know that's on there. Okay. Flaps up, trim set neutral. So it's something you need to do here because the next step will actually turn off the trim master switch, so it won't do anything. So next stage, I've actually set up an after landing checklist. So we turn off the standby altimeter. It's not necessary. Trim master come off, autopilot master, stick pusher come off, and pressure, air, pressurizations come off. So the door's now not sealed. We turn the fuel pumps off, switch the igniter, and pitot heat can come off, landing light can come off, and taxi can go on, and strobes can come off as well. And then on the side here we can switch the passenger oxygen off, defrost, and the air conditioning should go off at this point, and we're ready to taxi. So really fantastic little aircraft, this, quite easy to fly, very capable, really makes these longer flights actually a pleasure. But it's not quite as easy to fly as a jet in some ways. There's quite a lot of engine management which you don't have with a jet, and by that I mean one with a without a propeller, which you have to control. So let's just have a look and see how much fuel we use, just out of interest. So 645 pounds, which is quite a reasonable amount. So that's over an hour's flight. So you could actually estimate about £500 an hour. It doesn't quite work out like that, but there's a good estimate. Okay, go down through the shutdown checks. So power levers idle, beta is off, condition is low idle, propeller is feather, trim master switch off, autopilot master's off, external lights, we don't need taxi anymore, we'll keep the beacon on though. Air conditioning fan is off. We've got a 1 minute cool down period, that's how long you're meant to leave the engine to cool down. I'm not going to bother with that today, but after 1 minute put the condition lever to full cut off, and I always like going to the outside view for this, if only to hear the lovely sound of that engine spooling down. Beacon lights can come off as well. Okay, so we can switch the generator off, muster, avionics switch off, fuel, and we could just leave it there, or we could add the ground power unit, and could actually just add the static elements and click open door. That's it, that's our flight from Aspen to Vegas. Next flight we're going to depart from North Las Vegas and fly to Oceano, which is L52, a small airfield on the west coast of California, and this particular airport is actually commercial scenery, but it's actually free of charge, or at least was when I downloaded it from Orbix's site. Really nice little airfield, perfect for this aircraft. So do remember to join me on that flight. Thank you so much for your company today, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.